Hey everyone, welcome to the Building Excellence Podcast. I have a special guest, Coach Larry Kindbom. Coach Kindbom, thank you so much for being here.
Really, thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, before we kind of get into your football coaching career, we'd love to kind of dive into early life and what life was like growing up for you.
Well, I was really blessed. I had great parents that showed a lot of love and a lot of service, and my dad was, a little bit more on the grumblier side. Most people in our acquaintances would say that, but they all knew that he died for them, and that taught not just me lessons along the way, but I got to be the youngest of three, and my brother John and my sister Kathy both, exemplify great role models for me. That is almost easier, and the youngest usually kind of picks up and does what they want and rebels and does all those wonderful things. I didn't have to. I absolutely adored the two, and they were direct results of my mother and father. So we were a pretty tight-knit family, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and talking about your siblings, how they were impactful, but more importantly, your parents, what do you look back on that you really appreciate about them and what they did for you and your siblings, and maybe what you tried to instill as a parent when you were parenting?
Sure. Yeah, my father, still to this day, he's passed now, but it was so interesting. As we were sitting in church, and I still remember hearing the banging going on behind. That was my dad, who would not go into the church with us on Sunday morning, but was actually building the church with some other people in there, and for a year was providing them with free service, and that was a great time for him to do that, to be there, not be away from us in some ways, and so when we say building the church, obviously you're talking about building excellence. You're talking about somebody who physically was out there hammering during the service.
Yeah.
And in some ways that was comforting, knowing that my father was there. But I think that sums him up. Like, he was always kind of in the background. You knew he was there. He was going to be tough on you. My dad was really tough on us, but in the same light. He'd put the guardrails up, but he was there to make sure that we knew those guardrails were there for our health, for our reasons, and so I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sports were obviously important in your life. What were you doing in high school or even middle school of trying to be able to go and play at the next level? Well,
it's a great question, because all the way through, my brother was an absolute star. He was an outstanding baseball player, outstanding basketball player on the cross-country team, and with everything you would think that blue-chip high school athlete would be. I was probably so far on the other side of the spectrum.
Okay.
And to be real honest, that's where I was. I got cut from the basketball teams in 7th and 8th grade. Okay. The baseball team, I was always on a team that he was on, and then when he would graduate to the next level, then I'd get to play. But all the way through, I was following him, and then finally I got to high school. We had an outstanding baseball team, and I got cut my sophomore year. Huh. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm never I'm never going to live this down. So anyway, I get to play during the summer anyway, so I go out for the team during the summer that he's on, and I get cut again. So think about that. I'm cut back-to-back times, and my brother was really good about it. He never tried to make me feel good about that in the same light. He was kind of the one that, through his actions, it's like, hey, you want to do this, you better find a way to get better. And sure enough, that summer, that team I got cut from, he's on a team that is like one of the best in our state. Pennsylvania's a big state, so they're very, very good.
Sure.
We got to play them. I ended up getting on another team, making another team. We got to play them, and our team, which was totally full of misfits like me, beat them. And it was almost like it's fair, and I would say that for a lot of different things in my life, where we had to beat them. It wasn't like they just were poor. I mean, we had to beat them, and I had a good night, and I thought, you know what, maybe I'm not as good as him. And that's okay. I was all right with that. Again, I adored the guy, but it was kind of fun to know that, okay, I just have to go out and do it. And came back my senior year, went out for baseball, made it, got to start a lot of the time, and went to college and had to work my way up through. Football was the same. I was the last guy on, I think, both the football and the baseball team if they had to put us in order of both talent and production. I was the worst. And all of a sudden, my junior year, everything kind of fell together for my body and ended up having a good career. And so it wasn't, I didn't dream of playing college sports. I never thought about that. I just liked being around them. And a lot of that was because of my brother. Just being there and the excitement of watching a team come together. Even as a younger kid, that was the coolest thing for me. I didn't care if I played. I was in the dugout with the other guys in a baseball game, and there's no place in the world like being in a dugout in baseball. And I like that. Yeah. But I learned that it's kind of fun to be able to step up to the plate once in a while.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love that, and it's cool to hear how your brother was a good example to you. But before we kind of dive in, and just to foreshadow, you got to play baseball and football in college, so it all worked out. But at the same time, maybe let's press into a little bit of what it's like when you get cut. You got cut twice right in that same kind of time period of having a mindset that is either like, okay, I'm done, or okay, I'm gonna press into this, I'm gonna get better, I'm gonna keep working. What does that look like in that period of time for you? And maybe talk a little bit about how you kind of advised your players when things were not going well, battling some adversity, being resilient, having toughness. Like, I think that's a really important piece to your story that I think a lot of times you hear it go opposite, right? And so I'd love to hear maybe your thought process throughout that experience.
Sure. I never would have said at the time it was persistence that pushed me through, or resilience, or even on the other end of that, patience that, hey, my time's going to come someday. For me, I think it was more the reality of okay, this didn't work out the way I wanted to. Nobody wants to be cut.
Sure.
And it wasn't an embarrassing feeling for me. It wasn't like everybody's looking at me, and I know that there are some people that feel that way when things don't go for them. I never felt that way. I just felt like I let myself down, and some of that was, I have to say, there's a little bit in there. Maybe I let my brother down a little bit, and he was doing his own thing, and I'm sure he felt badly about it. And we've talked a little bit about that since, but I realized that the only way that I'm going to be able to make it successful is if I find a way, or I spend the time, or the focus, or whatever it was. I don't know if I ever would have put it into words back then, but I knew there was just something inside of me said, if you really want to do this, and I did really want to do it, and not to be seen or just to say I made the team, but I really felt like I think there's more to me than what I've been able to show, and that's my fault. And I did recognize that. So when I do talk to younger people, usually what I'll say is, I was you. And I've said that to people over the years. I was you. And if they want to explore that with me, and a lot of them do, they'll say, why did you say that, Coach? They all thought I had some great 4-year college career and this great high school career. And it's like, well, I did. I had a tremendous career. But mine were both shortened towards the very end. And especially in college when I finally matured, and there I was playing in an all-star game with Tommy Herr and Bruce Sutter, who, Bruce Sutter, Hall of Famer, right? And I'm in that all-star game with those guys, and I'm not taking a back seat. I'm getting up there and getting my swings against Bruce Sutter and say, yeah, but it had nothing to do with anybody else. It really had to do with my making a decision that this is something I want to do. And that carries all the way through into my Christian life. I had to make the decision that this is what I wanted to do. So
yeah, no, that's well said. And as you just shared, you got to play college football and baseball, had a great career, you maximized your abilities. When did you decide you wanted to coach, and then how did you wind up getting to Ohio State as a GA?
Well, the answer is that I never made that decision I wanted to coach until I got to Ohio State. Okay. I was on my way to law school. Decided to defer for a year, and I helped out over at Western Michigan, and I actually was a graduate assistant over there, but didn't want to coach. It was my way of being able to kind of take care of a master's degree. And then I decided to defer my law school acceptances for one more year and get down to Ohio State and work on a PhD. So I walked into Woody Hayes' office. I had no real idea of what major college football was like. Had none. You didn't see college football in the game on Saturdays because we were playing all the time. So I could never experience that until the bowl games, and I was okay into it and out of it, like most kids can be. I didn't have a favorite team or a favorite college. So when I went down to Ohio State, I had no idea, and I went into Woody's office. Woody Hayes was the head coach at the time, and I went into Woody Hayes' office and said I would love basically to be able to help out and carry footballs and water and just to be around it, but I'm working on a PhD. He got wind of my interest in law school and immediately looked at me and said, we're going to take care of this. He called, this is 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, he calls the dean of the law school, who I could only imagine at that time was laying in bed with his wife, ready to get out. All of a sudden, hey, Orrin, this is Coach Hayes. I have a young man in my office who wants to go to law school here. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm out here to get a PhD. I just want to help you out in law school? No. So I walked out of his office, and he kind of came out, and I'm walking down the hallway there at St. John Arena, and he says, let's have breakfast tomorrow. No explanation, nothing. And it's like, okay. So I get up the next morning and meet him in the parking lot. He texts me to breakfast, and all we do is talk about military history. We're talking about the Incheon landing and how we surprised the Japanese, and then we're talking about General Sherman going into Atlanta. He ran the triple option. They didn't know where he was. He was coming here and setting a fire and going there and setting a fire. And I am just more fascinated than anything else. This guy has lost it. This is a major college football coach. And then we finished with Napoleon Bonaparte trying to ram home the power play and got stuck in Stalingrad. And I just absolutely, and we never talked football. He never asked me. I found out later they did a little bit of research on me. I never did any research on them. All I wanted to do was carry around footballs and water and just be around the game, right? Never wanted to coach.
Yeah.
That was not in it. So we go back to the facility. It was called the North Facility back then, and walk into a classroom. There's 4 guys with their backs to me, and Woody walks up to the front of them and turns around and says, gentlemen, this is our new wide receiver coach. I mean, I didn't even ask. I had no idea. The question was never asked to me. So, but we made sure that it worked out with my getting my PhD, and so the courses and that, were able to jive with that whole thing. And it was a challenge, but ultimately that helped as I went through for me to see that this is where I want to be. So I finished my PhD coursework, never wrote my dissertation. I guess I'm writing that now.
Yeah.
But that's how I got into coaching.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great story. Also, the initiative to go. You didn't necessarily know Woody Hayes, right? So you went in there straight out of your own initiative, and then, you never know how things go sometimes, and it worked out for you. But what, maybe as your time at Ohio State, what were the takeaways from being under him, the Ohio State football program at the time? They were rolling. Just maybe talk a little bit about what you learned in your time with Woody Hayes and the people that you're around.
That's kind of what I'm writing a book right now, and so much of that is because of Woody Hayes. Coach Hayes was a great teacher. He believed strongly in discipline, and discipline not in the sense of punishment, but discipline in the sense of teaching and bringing people along. He cared about the players. He did so many things, and never in a way where they were going to come out with some financial gain or some favor, other than the realization that there was somebody out there that cared for them. And obviously Coach Hayes, well before I ever got there, had a lot of success, and those are all things that you say, okay, I can see why he's successful. But more, I began to see myself wanting to be like that, which is also a part of my testimony later on in my life about how I got into my Christian faith. There was somebody out there that I looked at, a role model, that I said, I want to be like that guy. I want to be able to show how much I care to the players, and be able to compete. I still love to compete,
Yeah.
but to be able to take that to another level, and the teaching lessons that came out of it were important to Coach Hayes. Everything was about the culture, even though that wasn't a word back then. The culture was really the thing he wanted to develop with those people, and he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what a great opportunity as a young coach to get a chance to be a part of that environment. And real quickly, I think this is kind of a fun story, but at the same time, was it kind of bookends to your career? There was a guy who was in front of you as a GA, and there was another guy who came in behind you. And who were those two people?
Well, no, they weren't. They weren't in that same position. What happened is I was there when Coach Hayes got fired. He had a young man from Clemson, and I was there to help Earl Bruce come in and go through his recruiting. And Earl asked me to stay on with the staff. And at that point, I knew I wanted to coach, but I wanted to find a small college. I wanted a place where I wasn't going to be moving every 2 years. And I knew I was on that fast track, which happens. You get in there and, okay, people recognize you, you're young, and, the ambition I didn't have, but usually those people have a lot of ambition. They can see that. I told Coach Bruce that I said, I'll help you recruit. And, I still know the recruits. We were kind of right in the middle of that. But I'd really like to find a small college. He helped me. So I tell everybody, I handed my keys to Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, ended up becoming that secondary coach then at Ohio State. I don't know what my position, I would imagine that would have been. And then Pete Carroll, I know, handed those keys over to Nick Saban when he left. And I thought, how cool is that as I look back, that all three of us ended up where we probably wanted to be. And, I never went beyond telling everybody I want to be a small college coach, and I did that for the rest of my career. And there Pete Carroll, who went into college and did a pretty good job, right? A couple national championships. But he really wanted to be in professional. And I don't know when that struck him, but he got where he wanted to be, and I think one of the more successful professional coaches have been around. And then, of course, Nick Saban is Nick Saban. And Nick, who kind of toyed around with different places, right? He was Michigan State, LSU, all of a sudden he's with the Dolphins, and then he goes back to Alabama saying, you know what, this is where I belong. And, I certainly don't put myself in the category with those guys, but I look and say, Nick Saban, a culture guy, one of the best. Pete Carroll at the professional level, a culture guy, one of the best. So it's kind of neat to say, okay, I was there, but that's like saying, okay, I got to see a Shakespeare movie. That doesn't mean I'm Shakespeare. That just means I got to see the movie.
Okay.
But I certainly enjoyed watching those guys in their careers and the things that they've done.
Yeah, well, three really good coaches all right there, kind of in the same time period. But at the same time, I think there's another story, too. You talked about Coach Hayes getting let go. You were, I think, right there in the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
And then you wound up, I think, having a pretty interesting conversation after at a restaurant, and Coach Hayes, and then I think
Bobby Knight,
right? What was that like? And did you get a chance to learn from Coach Knight, too, while you're there, or was this kind of experiences that shaped you,
No,
too?
to be honest with you, I didn't realize the situation that I had. Bobby Knight, one side of me, Woody Hayes on the other. We're having breakfast at the Holiday Inn there right next to St. John's Arena, and probably didn't appreciate it as much. I would always love to go, just listen. And I really felt that if there's one thing that God has given me, it's the 2 ears and the ability to listen to people and then enjoy what they're saying. So I was there. I could not tell you the magnitude that was a big time in my life, that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It was just like, oh, this is pretty cool. Indiana had just come off an undefeated national championship season, right? So he's there talking, and there's Coach Hayes, and they were playing Ohio State, which is why he was in Columbus. And there's Coach Hayes, who had just been let go.
Yeah.
And so I was probably more interested in watching how Bobby Knight talked to him, said very little. I had met Bobby Knight before, but again, didn't really say a whole lot. And two guys that a lot of people tie in together because they saw one aspect of both those people. And those weren't always the best aspects that even I would want to see, but at the same time to know that those are two guys that are probably recognized as two of the best ever. So,
well, and just having the chance, like you touched on, to get a chance to listen and be around them. I think even just within your story now, you get to see how you've been surrounded by really good people. And the environment is so important to be around good people that help you elevate, whether you know it or not, because of the environment. And I know that's a big component of when you moved to Akron. There was a great coach there. I think is it PMA? That you
Jim Dennison.
Jim Dennison were introduced to. If you wouldn't mind, share what you took away from that experience and what you learned as a coach.
Well, that was a game changer for me, and obviously Woody was too in a different way. I saw Woody as the teacher, the guy that would show up every day, was very accountable for what he did, including when he punched the young man. He was very accountable for that and said, yeah, I should be fired. Where Jim Dennison, there are two things that came from him that were really important to me. The first was that no one is bigger than the program. And I remember when he said that, like that touched me a little bit. And I just decided now, right, that coaching is what I want to do coming away from Ohio State. And there's a guy telling me that even me as a head coach, I'm not more important than you. I have a role. I'm going to fill that role. But no one is bigger than the program. Mm-hmm. And immediately it was like that. That's what I want to be. I told you, role models. I think you're beginning to see a pattern in my life that he was a role model for that, for me, that I would never want anybody to think I was more important than them. I mean, the players play. If anything, they're probably more important than us, right? And I had the chance to just hear that. I think it took a few years for that to settle in. But the second thing was, that life is full of all kinds of events, and it isn't what happens to you, but it's how you look at that and how you perceive that and how you interpret that, and then ultimately how you live through that. That's the important thing. So his message was always about a positive mental attitude, and it's like, gosh, never thought about that. Yeah. And I think back now to getting cut. Right, and those are the thoughts going through my mind in this first team meeting at the University of Akron, and I'm thinking, yeah, I was cut. Did I have a positive attitude coming out of that? It's like, okay, this isn't what I wanted, but I want to move forward in my life, and it's like, no, not really. I wish I'd have known, that.
Sure.
But how cool is that, right? And to this day, attitude is only second to faith for me. That. My faith is the most important thing, and the second thing is attitude. How am I going to handle? And of course, faith handles a lot of that too, right?
Sure.
Right. But it's important because it's a way to connect with everybody who plays sports, who doesn't play sports. That it's all about attitude.
Yeah, and as you shared that, the attitude component is so important. But all these things you're learning as a young coach. And then you get a chance to be a head coach at Kenyon, and not just a football coach, but also a baseball coach. So you're doing both those roles. What did it look like when you finally got the opportunity to be a head coach and try to instill some of these values and the things that you wanted to really help and be a great mentor, not just a coach, but a mentor to these guys you were coaching?
Sure. I won't say that I was an imitator. I didn't take our Ohio State program or our Akron program. I had really too many things that I felt going on there. I came into a program that had a little bit of tension and strife, both within the university and then even through its history a little bit. We weren't known necessarily as a power. And although I had a good group of people, we had 39 football players who somehow got lost between the two coaches. So I had so many challenges in there. I didn't all of a sudden feel like I had to establish myself. I felt like I had to establish something that was positive that we could all hang on to. And, of course, having the attitude aspect was important, positive mental attitude, and having the faith aspect was really important, but it was at a school that didn't necessarily want us to be able to go out and profess our faith. And that in and of itself was a challenge, and it took me a while to mature, to realize that there's ways that you can do that. And then I got to the point where I say, you know what, I don't need to just other ways. There's times that I should be coming out and saying, this is the way it is. And I have to have confidence that if the school didn't want it, I totally understood. They were my bosses, but this is me, and I'm going to be leading you, and need to know that this is part of me. So between the attitude and the faith, that was so important that I didn't feel like I needed to get up there and say these are the 10 things that we're going to achieve. And so I gave the defense to our defense coordinator, Bill Heiser. I gave the offense to Pete Peterson, who was my best friend and got turned down for the job, which is another long story. But the great part about it is you guys take over. I'm coaching the offensive line. We only had 6 offensive linemen. Now, this is college football, right? And all the loss that we had in between there, it was like, my only thing is to get right now into attitude and faith in a different way, but not so that we can still be a good football team. We can still win. And I tell people to this day that God, I think, really had a sense of humor. First of all, putting me in a situation like that where maybe I had to grow as a Christian, as a lover of Jesus Christ. I had to grow in that area and understand the charge that I was given to go to all 4 corners of the earth, right, and profess the things that I had to learn ways to be able to do that. At the same time, I learned a lot about the attitude part. I got 6 offensive linemen. That's a few. So if the head coach can not complain every day about having 6 offensive linemen and we're still going to win, and we went 5-3-1, and that's still maybe the greatest. I just got done seeing 2 of the players came back to see me down here, and it was so awesome because they knew the challenge, and we really had good players, but we didn't have a lot of players. Yeah. And it's like, well, you know what? This is what we have. Let's go. And that's positive mental attitude in action. And they taught me. Now we get back to the role models. I had 39 role models that taught me really what I was hoping to be able to teach them, and that got us going.
I'm glad you touched on that, to have that positive mental attitude, even when you talked about the linemen. Not feeling like enough guys. I think sometimes as coaches it's easy to always dwell on what you don't have or the negative or the things you're always trying to improve on. But if you can keep it in a positive light, that's how you can really grow and keep a good camaraderie within your coaching staff also, but the players as well. So I think that's a great perspective. You started at Kenyon, and you were doing baseball too, which we didn't even talk about. When did you decide to step over and go to Wash U and then just be football coach?
That's a good question because I never wanted to leave Kenyon. Like I didn't care where we are. I don't care how many players. Now we obviously built that program up,
sure.
and we were pretty good when I ultimately ended up leaving. They won the championship the next year, which is the only championship they've ever won. Right, so I have all these players now that are behind me. I did not want to leave. I did not want to move. I wanted to go someplace and be there forever. And Washington University connected with me, and I went out there and looked. This was 2 years before I actually took the job, and said, I can't do it. I mean, our football team can beat these guys right now, right? Washington University was really struggling. So 2 years later, they had just hired a coach. They got rid of him. He wasn't necessarily the answer. And they called me back and said, would you be interested in interviewing? And now I was trying to decide, is this God talking to me now? Is this a different venue? And so I didn't know. I went out, and, kids are kids. I love the Kenyon kids that I could find myself in a 2-day interview absolutely saying I love these kids as well. And it really was a better situation. They had lost a lot more games, but in the bigger picture, you knew that you could win there as well. And that was part of it. I just wanted to be competitive. I thought if we could be competitive, we're going to win, because I'm the most competitive guy in the world, which everybody thinks is funny because the title of my book is Winning and Losing are Imposters, right? But I really felt like we could be successful there. And we had a much wider range geography of bringing students in. We were bringing them in from 50 states. And part of that was, this would be so neat in terms of being able to maybe go to more corners of the earth. But I'm not really sure, other than, God led me there when it was all said and done. And it was the same situation. It wasn't like all of a sudden I'm in a Christian situation where I can go out there and profess my faith, but I took that job in a different vein. So
yeah, and leading by example, you're able to make an impact on your guys. But getting to Wash U, Obviously, it was a great decision by the AD because you were there for 31 years, plus years. So that was wise on his part to hire you. But maybe share about, you talked about how they weren't in a great spot when you got there. What did it look like? And you talked about Kenyon, kind of the same situation. Building and sustaining the environment or the culture, whatever word you want to call it, for a long period of time at a high level to do it with great people. What did that look like for you, and how did you go about doing that at WashU, and why did you guys have that success you've had?
Well, I think you had the answer, but you just had everything turned around. So you start out with great people. And I think you have the most fun, and whatever your definition of success is, the most success when you're in an environment where you feel as though, first of all, you can be yourself among great people and you can learn. Every coach that was there, it seemed like, it's not true across the board, but it seemed like every coach was there for a long time. Mm-hmm. So we all came in about the same time, and we fed off each other. The collegiality, I think, among the coaches was enjoyable. And we were different personalities, but we'd listen to each other. And so from a professional standpoint, that was fun. That was sustainable for me. The ability to win, as I had felt that, we can probably recruit a little bit easier here. Pre-med's a big deal, and we're a very selective school, and we're recruiting against the Ivy Leagues. And I could picture, why would a guy come here over a Yale or a Harvard or Princeton? And I could picture that in my mind. Oh, absolutely. The people. I mean, this is so awesome here. And beautiful campus, and all those things went along with it, but it still came down to the people. I really enjoyed the people. And for me, it was like, I'm a Christian coach. I want to spread my wings. Washington University was really the place that God had called me to, and I think God would not have called me here if he didn't feel like maybe I could maybe be a little bit more verbal, and not just in my, as Paul would tell Timothy, in your actions and your faith and your purity and your love, but still it comes down to your words do matter, and to be able to carry that with me was absolutely awesome. So.
Yeah. Well, and how important were values, instilling the right values and sharing those?
Sure. I mean, how important, to me, that's biblical. To have a set of core values, integrity, honesty, truth, just one after another, humility, love, some of the words that you used, and passion, and those are all core values to me. I rate them, obviously, faith and attitude, I think, are the two most.
Sure.
I know you had mentioned persistence and passion, and those all fall in line. At any given time, some of those poke through a little bit more. But to me, that's where the winning and losing takes place, not the worldly scoreboard. We had our share of that too, but it was really more along the lines of, can this be us? And I really felt like we had tried to accomplish that over the years.
Mm-hmm. And you guys did. You brought in the right people with the right values. But talk a little bit about, you shared about it a little bit ago with the title of your book, but the scoreboard is an imposter. What does that mean, and why has that been an important phrase?
Sure. I already mentioned that I'm competitive, so when people hear that and they go, I don't know really about that guy, and it's like, okay, I totally get it, but the world tells us that it's all about wins and losses, and it's about making money, and it's about having, the BMW, or, all the different things that are associated with it. And sometimes I think that gets whittled down a little bit too much, but basically that's how a lot of us look at success, and then we spend the rest of our lives either working towards that or learning that isn't quite what we thought it was, right? I was fortunate enough that early in my career that wasn't the thing that drove me. I wanted to win. I thought, again, God had a sense of humor, so he sends me to a place that's hasn't won in a long time. So I'm going in with one idea that, hey, we're going to find a way to win. We'll grind our way through. But I'm going to be the man that the Lord wants me to be. I'm going to do this whole thing glorifying him. And to me, that's where the win comes. And, a lot of the book that I have written is about, what success is. And John Wooden, who would say, success is being the best that you can, right? And the only thing I add to that is, as long as you're glorifying God, right? But I think that question has to be answered. My favorite poem actually was my second year. I'm coaching at Washington University, and I read this poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If," and it's a poem that every father should read or mother should read to their kids, because that talks about that. And there's a line in that just gripped me so hard, that you meet triumph and disaster and treat those imposters the same. And I said, you know what? That's my life. And I'm not too sure that isn't everybody's life, that the world is going to tell us this. It's an imposter, right? And now, this is where the Lord has a sense of humor. We started winning football games. Believe me, some of those games are not games that I think we should have been winning. Okay. And I don't know how they kept falling our way. And I know that attracts good people when you go through that. And it always sounds when a coach says, oh, yeah, winning and losing, that's not the most important thing. They say, yeah, sure, until you lose and they fire you, then it's most. But I never had a lack of comfort. And we went through a stretch of 11 or 12 straight years where we have winning seasons every year. We've been going to the playoffs. And I don't think I felt different. I mean, I was glad, certainly, but I don't think I felt differently about what my mission was with those kids. So probably as importantly, I was getting from them that same answer to that mission question, that they're feeding it back to me, that coach, man, we want to win too, but their camaraderie, their togetherness, their ability to walk lines and to make mistakes and know that that wasn't going to destroy their lives, right? So that's where losing can be an imposter too, right? That we all make mistakes. You just see it more in your own life and others. And when we had that, the word is culture now. Again, we never use that word, but when you have that culture going for you, you don't think about it as much. You just go out every day and try to do the best you can do. And for me, that was honoring the Lord.
Sure, and I think that's a great perspective. But one thing, as you're talking, I'm thinking about is in the Bible it talks about being content in all things. And I'd love to hear your perspective on contentment, but still being competitive, still working. But what does that look like for you, and how do you think people should view that?
Well, I can tell you how I view it.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that was a perspective. And I'm surrounded by a great group of people. I joined a journey group here in town, and I have an accountability group that reminds me of this all the time. Content in all things means to me that the Lord has something to do with everything in our lives. So the content part and the comfort part of knowing that the Lord is there, that we should have joy for that. So we're going to have times where things aren't going to go our way. And how many times is that expressed in the Bible? That either it happens to somebody through stories, right? Or we're being told flat out that, hey, this is going to be tough. But get excited about that, because if it's tough, it's going to be something that's going to help you grow closer to the Lord. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that, because what it does, winning and losing are imposters, right? That when you fail forward, right? I mean, failure isn't necessarily a final defeat unless you let it be. So you're making a choice of how failure is going to be in your life, and I look for the strength in God, right? Who's in all things. So I'm in the failure. I mean, He's right there with me, saying, "Hey, here's my hand. I'm not going to tell you that this is going to end the way you want it to, but I am going to tell you that I'm here, right? And you're a winner. I'm going to see you for eternity. So this is just a blip on the. And if you think about that for everything that you do, how cool is that, right? It just makes things go easier when you can't find your keys,
Yeah.
like I had right before I came out here in my life, saying, yeah, positive mental attitude. Where was that 10 minutes ago? But that's it. It's like, okay, so I'm human, and I'm going through that, and it's like, okay, so is this the end of the world? Is it? And you almost have to smile, and just say, no, through all things. Mm-hmm. But I think that's where the content is. It's through knowing that you have the strength of the Lord that's going to help you through it. He's not going to stop it. He's not going to tell you, I'm not going to let that happen to you. He's going to say, I'm here so that you can interpret that and understand that. Mm-hmm. And that's like taking positive mental attitude to me, to the supernatural level, that, man, be content, right? Be joyful. And that was the thing that really was a final blow for me becoming a Christian, is watching another man, Grant Taff, who got up there, and I kept saying, that guy, through Fellowship of Christian Athletes, FCA, so big in my life. Have Grant Taft speaking to a group, and it's like, there's something about that guy I like, and it's the joy that he had. It was the thing that I thought I was missing. I was a checklist Christian, and I was doing all these things, and it's like, come on, Lord, man, how come I'm not joyful? And it's like, well, you know what? I'm not content in all things. In all things, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's well said, but it's in all things.
In all things.
And ups and downs, right?
Yes.
Being content. So, going back into coaching real quickly, I'd love to hear your perspective. Obviously, Nick Saban's coined the idea of the process, but how important is understanding where you want to go, having a vision as a coach or as a person in your life or anything, as in your marriage and your business, and then beginning with the end in mind and working backwards and developing systems and a process to help hopefully achieve those goals or outcomes you'd hope to have, but understanding that it's not necessarily about that, it's about the process of doing it.
Sure. So just so you know, my book is basically, it's an anecdote, and then it's what I learned from this. So in one of those chapters, in my chapters on vision, and this was so cool, the people that I'm around, we decided that, we're playing top-level teams, and we're beating some teams now in the top 15, the top 20. If we wanted to be a top 10 team, a top 10 program more than a top 10 team, every year people would look at us. What would we be doing right now that we're not doing? And we just brought that up in a coaches meeting and talked about it. And this was what was so cool about it, is we weren't allowed to say, well, if we could get more kids in or something. I mean, it's like, no, we're not going to change the template of what we're working in. It's just, what would we have to be doing differently with the things that we presently have? That really stretched me. We took that meeting and went. We met once a week, every Wednesday, bring our lunch, and that's all we'd talk about. So we'd talk about recruiting one day, or we'd talk about player relationships with coaches and so on. And think about, that we already have the resources we need. What would we have to do with those resources? Be content in all things, right? So don't go about it with the idea that we have to change everything. And I'm going to tell you what, I grew so much just to hear different people think about it. Then when the players came back to campus during our preseason, we would meet with them like, it wasn't every day, but it was like every other day during preseason, such a short time, asking them the same questions so that they could begin to think in that vein of what will we need to be doing, and I'll bring up the relationships. So the relationships would be honest, they'd be transparent. And now these are both coaches and players that kind of said the same thing. When coach would say, how's your day going? The player could actually tell him how the day's going without feeling like he needed to put on a smile or whatever it might be. And when you get people thinking that way, when you're a group, again, winning, losing, or imposters, right? We vaulted into the top 10 once or twice, but I can tell you that we probably weren't one of the, we never finished in that top 10, right? So I can't say that we were a top 10 program every time from a win-loss standpoint, but I like to think that, if there's somebody out there doing it better, I'm going to go visit them, because our players had some kind of abiding love with the coaches. And abide is a big word for me. I mean, I know what it's like to have Christ abide in you and me. And so when you get teams that begin to operate that way, right? Yeah. Greatest team ever. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, right, man? Hey, 3-in-1, one heartbeat, team together. And that's what I could see our team not making this great, big, massive change, but maybe a massive awareness. And I thought that was so cool. I I can't say that translated necessarily into wins and losses on the field. I think it had a lot to do with the fact that when our players leave, the connections and that kind of thing was really important. So to me, that was vision lived. So it was easy for me to, as a vision, say, okay, here's what we want to do. Well, they're not going to take ownership of that. That's Coach Kindbom's thing, right? But it was like, boy, I said that, and we're doing it, right? Or we're talking about it anyway, right? And I think that's always the beginning.
Sure, and I think there's a lot of little ways and little things that you would do as a coach and your coaches would do for your player. Like, I think one of them was writing notes to all your guys and just being intentional about that. So I think there's lots of things in application that you did, but there's one I really want to highlight, and I think it was the playbook of a champion, right? If you wouldn't mind, share that concept and how that evolved and what was that?
Wow. So one of my former players, Chris Creighton, who's now the head coach at Eastern Michigan University, one of the brightest head coaches in the country, had, through Jim Tressel, and Jim was a guy I actually followed when I took the job at Akron, and I got to know Jim really well, but here's Chris Creighton through him, that Jim Tressel wrote a book called The Winner's Manual. And Chris read that and said, you know what, I'm going to take this idea and I'm going to send letters out to some different people and who I hope they can tell their stories to our players. So Chris told me he did this, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm going to make a whole book of this. So I literally spent 3 or 4 weeks in the beginning of a summer, almost nonstop, handwriting letters to most of them, to people that you'd say they're never going to answer you, right? And I think just in the sports world, Mike Krzyzewski, Bobby Knight, all these people, and I'd ask them something personal and different that wasn't like, what do you think we can do to get better? Or if you had anything to say to our kids, what would it be? But like Mike Krzyzewski, you won 2 championships in a row at Duke. And I heard you say that it's so hard to win that 3rd championship. We had come off 2 championships in a row, and I'd like to use some of your wisdom. What would you have? And he wrote this long letter back, and I was getting letters from we had Bob Dole, who was at the time vice presidential candidate, Al Gore, who thought he was going to be the presidential candidate, and just all these. So from politicians to obviously sports figures to Moynihan, from the CEO at Bank of America. These people, and they're writing these letters back to our players, and these are personal letters. Hey, Coach Kindbom told me about it. Let me tell you about their story. Now, I'm big on stories. I know you are big on stories. The Bible, right? The Bible's a storybook to me. And these guys were writing letters. These people were writing letters to our players, talking about their life experience and something in their life that happened to them. It was, you're building excellence, but written down with direct letters to Washington. The best was the zoo guy at the Columbus Zoo, who go over to Africa and do all these things, and he talks about this. When he started out with his own zoo on a farm and had a lion, and this young lady came over to visit his zoo, and the lion took her arm off. I'm thinking, oh God, well, that doesn't sound good. So something good's going to come out of it. And then he says, there goes my career. So it's like, oh my gosh, it wasn't a happy ending story. And he continues on though, and it's like, I had to deal with that because this is what I know. His name is Jack Hanna. This is what I know I was meant to do. And here he was on the day. He wrote this letter in pencil from Africa, got it sent overseas so he could meet my deadline to be able to hand this. So we had probably, I'd say close to 80 to 90 letters from different people. And then I got our high school coaches to write letters. So we had this big thing. We called it the Playbook of Champions. Yeah. And it just took off. Everybody wanted it. It went viral. The New York Times is calling me on the phone, and it's like, no, this is for our players. This is not for publicity. I really don't care. And I know it sounded like I was being arrogant, and it wasn't. This was very personal. When somebody writes a letter, it's personal. Paul writing all those letters to Timothy in the Bible. I cried. That was the point that took me and said, hey, Lord, I'm on your team. I want Jesus Christ. I want you to be my Savior. because I see these things that Paul is telling Timothy through personal letters. So I believe strongly in the written word, and I believe even more so with letters that are very personal to people. But the Playbook of Champions was that, and it's never been published. A lot of people told me it should be, and it's like, you know what? It's just fun to go through once in a while and look at. So.
Oh, that's incredible. I thought you were about to say Tiger King on there, but it was Jack Hanna, so I'm glad you clarified. But I think that's such a great concept to be able to be intentional and doing it for not just the players, but those stories, those conversations, those letters not just impacted them from their time in college, but I'm sure even today there's a lot of lessons that they learned just from that concept of the Champions Playbook or the Playbook of Champions. And I think one real quick question I'd love to ask you, as you did that, you kind of see in your story how have you always been someone always seeking out, trying to learn and grow from people? Because I know there's another story that you told me before of being out at Stanford working football camp and getting a chance to sit down and always, but there was a lot of persistence in making that happen, right?
Yes.
Has that always been a kind of a natural makeup for you? And why is maybe that desire to learn and grow important in anybody?
Well, I don't know if that's the youngest child syndrome.
Okay.
The rebelling probably really wasn't me, but the curiosity was. Yeah. And, I'd probably drive people crazy. I just took a new position working at a local high school here, Metro Christian Academy. Jared McCoy, he's one of the best coaches I've ever been around. I love being around that guy. And I am sure I have already driven him into insanity because I ask so many questions. That's always been part of me. Mm-hmm. I want to know what makes people tick and on a bigger picture. And I know that I wasn't smart enough to figure this out as a kid, but I love people's stories. And I've always been that way. I would love to sit down and listen to my dad's stories. And I don't care if he told them 3 times or 100 times. It's like, tell me again. I just love to hear it. Maybe I'm going to pick something up. And not because I wanted to tell other people. I was satisfied in being able to get, for me, the real person that I was talking to. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, the Bible it's a storybook to me. And I read about these people. And there's times I picture myself, well, that's me. What would I do if I were in that situation? And there's David looking at Goliath, and it's like, what would I do? I think I'd be scared to death, and I want to read more. I mean, and ultimately, there's a lot of people that I say, I want to inherit, or at least achieve, or receive some of those things that person has. So I want to know what makes you tick. What is it that gets you excited about a positive mental attitude? I mean, it sounds so cliche. I don't want it to be cliche. I want it to be real, or I want to say, I don't care. I'll just throw it out. That's not me. And it's because of that, I think I've been able to, through the Lord, be able to change my life. And the Lord's part a lot of times was putting people in front of me that I never would have met had he not been there.
Yeah, and the Lord puts those people in front of you, but you have to have the initiative to go and see and learn and continuously be around those people, right? So I think that's a big key in your story. And as we start winding down, you've talked a lot about your coaching career. Obviously, you're also sharing what you're learning with so many other people. I know you started a coaches summit that a lot of different coaches from all different levels would come to. So I know that is important, not just learning, but sharing it. And I think that's really key to be able to share that. But at the same time, as you're a coach, 31 years at WashU, a lot of success there, Kenyon College, you've shared your whole story. But along the way, you've had a family and you've had a spouse. In your opinion, what does it mean to be a good husband and father, and maybe some application points on people, advice you'd give to people in those regards?
Well, it's another area I had to grow, right? I get tears when I think about my wife. Most people, when they call me now, how are things going in Tulsa? And I say, my wife and I get up every day and we're walking around the block, and we're walking around the block later on in the day, and we're going to get our 15,000 steps together. And people just kind of laugh at that. And it's like, that is the absolute best time of the day outside of, sitting with a Bible and reading the Bible. I love my kids. My wife is, she's like, I don't even know how to describe it. And we abide in each other a little bit, and yet we're very different. She'll tell me what to do, and I'll go do it. Right? So I think that's where the love and service comes in. She loves, and then I'll serve. But I think it's easy to get lost in that. Obviously, the winning and losing are imposters. I had to go through some tough times in my life to realize how important it is that, the win is being able to be with the person that you would like to be with on this earth. That's a win, right? Now, there's a lot of things that happen in there that don't really go the way you want them to. Yeah. And as the Lord has told you, I mean, this was what was in your heart, is that there is content in all things. And even when you have those tough times, the fact that there's somebody that I love so much that I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to say, you know what, you're right, that's a hard thing to say, isn't it, right? Or I don't know, which is another hard thing to say, but we lead each other, and I think that's where marriages are. But we've grown, so it isn't like we're the same as we were, years ago, right? It's like, and don't ask me how many years, because that'll get me into trouble. Okay. But we would both say here right now that we've kind of grown further. It's closer. It's been unreal.
Yeah,
so.
That's awesome. That's a good answer. Well, real quickly, I've got a little fire round, so I'll say a sentence or a word, and you can finish with a word or sentence, however you feel led.
Okay.
Stewardship means.
I'm sorry, could you say
Stewardship means.
Stewardship means. Resources.
Favorite vacation spot.
Marco Island.
Okay. Humility means.
Serving.
Do you have a favorite book besides your own that's coming out?
Absolutely. The Bible.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we're done with the fire round. The final two questions, first and foremost, change it up here a little bit. You've shared how faith's been important in your life throughout the whole story right now. How has it always been a foundation for you in everything that you do? You talked about all things, being content in all things. How has it always been a part of your DNA?
Well, it hasn't always been. That's the thing. So, I mean, there was a point where I had to make that decision. When I made that decision, it wasn't as some people where, boy, everything is just clicking right now. And I made that decision. And then I went back and had to, I'm curious, right? How do all these things work? And the very first thing I did was I read the Bible from start to finish. And that was a little bit of a struggle because the Old Testament was the Old Testament. And when I finished, I told you, it wasn't like all of a sudden now there's this joy. Yeah. And so I knew the words. I was a good checklist person. I made the decision, right? But I didn't have joy. And the thing that I missed, and I tell everybody that this is where the FCA, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, were so important. I thought the F stood for free and a free breakfast, that I got to hear Grant Taft talk. And when I found out the F was for fellowship, when it was all said and done, that's what I was still missing. So like I made the commitment to the Lord. Jesus Christ was my Savior. I knew that. I still can't tell you that I had the joy. So I really didn't know that, right? I needed Christian brothers to be able to help me stay accountable in the things that I did. And when I understood the fellowship part, then I began to understand the harvest part where Jesus is telling us to go out and share. So at that point, the foundation is set, but that foundation is growing. So it's not like even now I'd say, I got all the answers. I don't. My gosh. I look to Jesus every day to say, I want to grow even closer to you because I want to be the person that you would say yes. That's my trusted son who's going out and sharing my story with everybody.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great. Well, I'm going to add one more question in here. First and foremost, like your new book, why did you decide to write it? Winning and Losing Are Imposters. What was the purpose of it, and why did you feel like it was something you wanted to do?
Well, it's interesting because the purpose I started out through this whole thing was to put down the things that I have learned over my lifetime. And of course, each of my chapters I mentioned begins with an anecdote, and then what did I learn from that? And as I was writing the book, different things began to fall in. Sometimes different anecdotes, sometimes different things that I was aware of, but I didn't necessarily learn them, but I learned to be aware of them. Just like the story I just gave you with my Christian walk. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, I get it, but I don't, so I got to pursue it more. And that curiosity, I think, as I'm writing these chapters, I'm growing, learning about things that I thought I was just going to sit down and write about. So that's been the most fun part of the book for me. But the anecdotes are really the things. People understand stories, and maybe not everybody. And then I would say that this book isn't for you. It's not a book where you would say, gosh darn, this has the 50 most important things in leadership. I never go that direction. I go, this is what was there. Sometimes I had to make decisions. Sometimes I had to prepare for something. Sometimes I had to react for something. Sometimes I just could sit and watch what somebody else was doing. And all those are blended in and saying, you know what, I learned from those. So God put that curiosity inside of me. I really think part of it now is giving back, saying, okay, Lord, here's what I learned. And I actually think sometimes this is pretty good stuff. And there's times I look at that and say, I wonder if anybody would really like that. And I'm being very honest about that. But it's like, yeah. I mean, when it's all said and done, there's a checklist of 31 different things, 31 general areas that I've learned that at least I'm speaking about right now. But it's fun, talking to people like you that appreciate excellence and pursuit of excellence. To me, that's key, right? In things that I do, I always want to pursue excellence. And how do I find that in humility, right? How do I find that in telling the truth? How do I find that in making a plan or being put in a crisis situation where I got to make a decision? And those are the kind of things I think that have been fun for me doing this.
And that's a good segue into kind of our final question. This podcast is called Building Excellence. What does building excellence mean to you?
Well, I would like to just be able to put a mirror up facing your direction as you're asking that question, because that's what building excellence is. It's, first of all, I talked about fellowship, how important that was. Right? No one person has that. And the Bible, that's the word, right? That has everything. But even to understand that, you need to be around other people to say, let's talk about this, right? So building excellence is bringing people together that are in the pursuit of being the best that they can be. And then if you want to, put a topic out there with it, you can do that and say, how can that help me grow? But that journey that you have as you're trying to go through that fellowship and you're reading and your professional development, and you're asking obnoxious questions till early hours in the morning, to me, that's the excellence that you're building.
Yeah. Well,
right?
Coach Kindbom, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing your story, the lessons that you've learned, and what's the best way for people to find your new book when it comes out?
Well, I'm trying to learn that. I'm not much of a marketer or promoter, but I do have, I do have a LinkedIn page. I have a Facebook page, and I'm being taught those lessons as I go through, and I'm being the curious guy that I am, because I want to be good at that. Because my second book is going to be on Christian leadership. And to me, that's like, okay, so this is helping me build excellence, right, as I'm getting ready for that second one. But all of that we'll be able to find out on my LinkedIn and my X page, my Twitter page, whatever we call it.
And we'll be sure to put all those in the show notes as well for you.
Well, there you go.
But anyway, Coach Kindbom, thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. God bless you.
Yep.